It was career week at Prescott Elementary in Chandler, Arizona, and students were buzzing with excitement. This was the one time of year when they got to take a break from the usual routines of math problems and spelling tests. Instead, the classroom would be filled with visitors from all walks of life, sharing what they did for a living. Some kids could barely contain their excitement, eager to introduce their parents and the jobs they did. Others, however, felt a little more reluctant. Perhaps their parents' jobs weren't as flashy, or perhaps they simply didn't like the spotlight. Eli Brooks, an 8-year-old third grader, couldn't wait for the moment when it would be his turn to speak. He had spent days preparing. He had practiced the words in front of his mirror, drawing pictures of his father in his NASA uniform. Eli's dad was a man of few words, but he was deeply proud of his work. And Eli, well, he couldn't wait to tell his classmates about what his father did. When the day finally arrived, Eli was ready. His heart raced with anticipation. This was his time to shine. As Mr. Riley, his teacher, asked each student to stand and share what their parents did, Eli sat up straighter in his chair. His palms were sweaty, but he didn't let that stop him. He was about to tell everyone about the most amazing thing in his life. His dad worked at NASA. As he opened his mouth to speak, the words came out confidently. "My dad works at NASA." For a brief second, there was a stunned silence. Then, before he could even register it, the class erupted in snickers. One child let out an audible snort. Another whispered, "Yeah, right." But it was Mr. Riley's reaction that stung the most. Mr. Riley was a man in his early 40s with thinning hair and khakis that looked a little too pressed for a third-grade classroom. When Eli spoke, Mr. Riley's face twisted into a half-smile, one that wasn't kind or encouraging. His eyebrows shot up in disbelief, and then he chuckled, a low, dismissive sound that made Eli's heart sink. "NASA, huh?" Mr. Riley said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's quite the imagination, Eli. Maybe next time, let's aim for something a little more realistic." The laughter spread across the room, like wildfire, as a few kids giggled and one even repeated the joke under her breath. More realistic. The air in the classroom grew thick with doubt, the kind that only a dismissive adult could instill. Eli's confidence evaporated. The vibrant, excited child who had walked into class that morning with a chest full of pride was suddenly deflated. He didn't say another word. He just stared at the rug beneath him, his hands curled into tight fists, his sneakers tapping together nervously. The class went on, but Eli wasn't really there. He wasn't thinking about the rest of the presentations or the cupcakes that were about to be handed out by Chloe's mom, the bakery owner. He wasn't even thinking about the firefighter dad who was about to talk about fire trucks and rescue missions. He was still stuck in that moment, the moment where his truth had been laughed at. But there was one person who noticed. Mila, who sat next to Eli, leaned in. She whispered, her voice soft but firm, "I believe you." It was a simple statement, but to Eli it was the lifeline he didn't know he needed. He didn't answer her. He just nodded slightly, the tears threatening to form behind his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. Instead, he looked at the floor, his small hands clenched tightly in his lap. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How could Mr. Riley, the one person who was supposed to guide him and encourage him, laugh at him? How could the teacher not believe him? It wasn't just the teacher's disbelief that stung. It was the disbelief of everyone in the class, the laughter that followed, and the sense that Eli was somehow not good enough, not real enough to have a dad who worked at NASA. As the morning passed, Eli found himself becoming more and more invisible. He didn't laugh when the other boys did their silly dances in the hallway. He didn't race to the swings as he usually did during recess. Instead, he stayed quiet, his heart heavy with embarrassment. He tried to swallow the knot in his throat, but it wouldn't go away. In his mind, Eli ran over the words he had practiced over and over again. He thought about his dad, about the work he did, about the pride Eli had in his father's accomplishments. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. The moment Mr. Riley had laughed, it had crushed him. 3 days before career week, Eli had spent hours with his father in the garage. His dad, Dr. Kelvin Brooks, was deep into the middle of a project, a Mars communications relay. It was technical work, and Eli didn't always understand the specifics, but his father had a way of explaining things simply. One afternoon, while Eli sipped his Capri Sun, he asked, "Wait, so how long does it take for the rover to send a message back to Earth?" His dad paused his work and looked at Eli. "Depends on where Mars is in orbit, buddy. It can take anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes. Eli's eyes widened. "So it's like texting someone with really bad service?" His dad laughed. "Exactly. Space has terrible Wi-Fi." This simple moment, just him and his dad, felt like magic to Eli. He wasn't just learning about how space worked. He was learning from the man he admired most, a man who made difficult concepts easy to understand with humor and kindness. Eli cherished these moments where his father took the time to explain things simply. His dad didn't have to be grandiose or boastful about his work. His dad's knowledge was vast, but he made sure Eli felt just as smart in their shared moments. As they worked together, Eli knew his dad was a genius. More importantly, he knew that his dad loved him and took the time to make sure Eli understood. Before the big day, Eli had brought a NASA folder to his room, excited to show it to his class. He had spent hours drawing pictures of his dad in his NASA uniform. He was so proud of his father and couldn't wait to tell everyone about the projects his dad worked on. But when Eli asked, "Can I show this at school?" his dad gently shook his head. "I don't think I'm allowed to bring classified stuff to show and tell, buddy. But you don't need the folder. You just need your voice." As Eli sat in class on Career Week, his mind was still swirling with thoughts of his father's advice. "What if they don't believe me?" he had asked his dad. "Then that's their problem, not yours," his dad had said. Eli's voice trembled as he stood in front of the class, but his dad's words echoed in his mind. The truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to be said. But when Eli's truth was met with laughter, he couldn't shake the hurt. It was a deep, painful feeling that lingered throughout the day. And as the hours ticked by, he found himself crumpling the pictures he had drawn, shoving them into the bottom of his backpack. His excitement had collapsed into shame in the blink of an eye. But there was still hope. As the afternoon wore on and the Career Week presentations continued, Eli sat silently at his desk, hoping against hope that his father would show up. He imagined his dad walking into the classroom, wearing that familiar NASA badge and making everything right. He waited, checking the door every few seconds. Finally, as the clock neared 1:30, Eli heard a soft knock on the door. And there he was, his dad, Dr. Kelvin Brooks, in a navy blue blazer, slacks, and the unmistakable NASA badge clipped just below his breast pocket. For a moment, the room was silent. Eli sat up straight, his eyes wide. This was real. This was his dad. Dr. Brooks gave a calm nod to the class before he spoke. "Hello, I'm Dr. Brooks. I design spacecraft." And just like that, the room was frozen. Mr. Riley stood there, clipboard in hand, unable to form words. He was visibly uncomfortable as he watched Dr. Brooks address the class. It wasn't the kind of moment that needed applause or admiration. It simply needed the truth. And Eli's father had walked in and delivered it effortlessly. Dr. Brooks continued, explaining how spacecraft communicated with Earth, how they built the systems that allowed rockets to stay in touch with us. The class, now fully engaged, leaned forward, captivated by Dr. Brooks's calm, assured presence. And Eli? He was glowing. For the first time that day, he felt proud again, not just of his father, but of himself. The silence in the room had shifted. No one was laughing anymore. Instead, there were wide eyes, nods of respect, and even a few murmurs of admiration. Mila, who had whispered her belief in him earlier, now smiled knowingly at Eli. "I told you so," she said quietly. Eli nodded, his heart swelling with pride. But there was still something unresolved. It wasn't just the moment of seeing his father walk in. It was what had happened before. The laugh that almost crushed him, the doubt that had been cast on his dreams. Dr. Brooks, without even addressing the issue directly, had said more than enough just by being there. His presence spoke volumes, and Eli knew that things were about to change. Not just in how his classmates saw him, but in how Mr. Riley would perceive him as well. As Dr. Brooks wrapped up his presentation, he paused and looked directly at the class. "By the way," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I heard someone earlier say that working at NASA might be unrealistic." Eli held his breath, and the entire class became still. "I guess some people have a different definition of realistic," Dr. Brooks continued, turning his gaze to Eli, who now sat a little taller than before. The words hit like a hammer, but in the best possible way. Eli felt a rush of relief, a burst of pride. His dad had just publicly, quietly, and confidently stood up for him without ever having to address the earlier doubts directly. It wasn't about proving something to his classmates or even to Mr. Riley. It was about honoring the truth, no matter who believed it. Dr. Brooks smiled, a slight knowing smile. He turned to the class. "I hope you all learn that no dream is too big. And remember, sometimes the things people tell you aren't realistic are the things that will change the world." The room was silent for a moment before a few of the kids started clapping. Slowly at first, but then with more enthusiasm. Mila was the first to join in, and soon the entire class was clapping. Mr. Riley, standing off to the side, didn't clap, but his posture had shifted. His shoulders were no longer stiff. There was a subtle shift in the way he regarded Eli. Dr. Brooks nodded to the class, said a few final words about the importance of space exploration, and then turned to leave. As he walked past Mr. Riley, he paused for a moment, his gaze locking with the teachers. "I hope your students always feel heard," he said, his voice soft, but with weight, "especially the ones who dream big." And with that, Dr. Brooks left, leaving behind a room full of children with a new understanding of what was possible. After Dr. Brooks walked out, Mr. Riley stood frozen for a moment. His clipboard hung limply in his hands, and he seemed unsure of what to do next. The energy in the room had completely shifted. The students weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at Eli. The class had witnessed a transformation. Not only had Dr. Brooks shattered the boundaries of what they thought was possible, but the weight of the previous moments hung in the air. Mr. Riley had been so sure of his judgment earlier when he dismissed Eli's words, but now the same students who had once snickered were looking at Eli with new eyes. Mr. Riley shifted on his feet and cleared his throat, trying to return to his normal routine. "All right," he said, his voice a little thinner than usual. "Let's thank Dr. Brooks for coming." His words were met with polite applause, but even he knew the tone of the classroom had completely changed. It wasn't just the awe of meeting someone from NASA. It was the realization that, in that moment, they had witnessed something far more powerful, a lesson in humility, in the danger of dismissing someone's dreams, and in the importance of validating others' experiences, no matter how unrealistic they may seem. Eli didn't smile immediately. He sat quietly, his hands neatly folded on his desk, and waited for the rest of the presentations to finish. As the class filed out to recess, Mr. Riley approached Eli's desk. "Hey," he said, his voice too casual, "your dad seems like a pretty smart guy." Eli looked up at him. "He is," he replied simply, his voice steady. Mr. Riley nodded, a moment of awkward silence hanging between them. "I just wanted to say, I may have jumped the gun earlier," he muttered. Eli didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at Mr. Riley for a long moment, as if weighing whether the apology was real or simply a result of the shift in the classroom dynamic. Finally, Mr. Riley spoke again, his tone softer this time. "Sometimes people make mistakes. We don't always realize when something we say comes out wrong." Eli continued to stare at him, not in anger but in a quiet resolve. "But you laughed," he said. His voice wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact. Mr. Riley winced as though the words had struck him hard. "Yeah," he admitted, "I did. And I'm sorry for that. It wasn't right. I should have listened." Eli didn't nod. He didn't feel the need to make it easier for Mr. Riley, but there was something in his eyes, something that told Mr. Riley he had a long way to go in terms of understanding the impact of his actions. After a long silence, Mr. Riley spoke again. "I hope you'll give me a chance to do better." Eli stood up slowly, slinging his backpack over one shoulder, and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he turned around, looking back at Mr. Riley with a quiet confidence. "It wasn't your imagination," Eli said softly. "That's really my dad." And with that, he walked out of the classroom, leaving Mr. Riley standing there, a little stunned, his mind whirring with everything he had just witnessed. Eli walked down the hallway with his head held high, not because of the claps or the applause he received, but because of the quiet victory he had just experienced. For the first time that day, he felt seen, not just by his classmates, but by the world. The whispers that had followed him around all day were gone. The doubt that had threatened to creep into his heart had been silenced by his dad's simple yet powerful presence. And the teacher who had doubted him now understood the weight of his words. As Eli walked home that afternoon, he thought about the lessons he had learned, the importance of speaking your truth, the power of believing in yourself even when others don't, and the quiet strength that comes from standing firm in your beliefs. In the weeks that followed, Eli noticed something different. The other kids in his class no longer looked at him with skepticism. They looked at him with respect. One even asked if his dad had ever met an astronaut. Another asked if Eli could bring in one of his dad's space tools for show and tell. Eli didn't boast or puff himself up. He simply answered their questions and kept moving forward. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. His dad had already done that. The following morning at school, Mila walked beside him, a knowing smile on her face. "They believe you now," she said. Eli shrugged, trying to play it off. "They didn't have to," he said. Mila grinned. "Still nice, though." Later that afternoon, Mr. Riley, who had clearly been doing some self-reflection, slipped a handwritten note into Eli's cubby. It wasn't typed, formal, or polished, just a simple note on a folded-up sheet of paper. Eli found it after lunch, and when he read it, he folded it up and quietly slipped it into his backpack. The note read, "Eli, I was wrong. You shouldn't have had to prove anything to us. Keep dreaming big. Mr. Riley." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was something. It was enough. As the final bell rang and Eli walked out of the school with his head held high, he knew that, no matter what had happened before, his truth had been heard. The journey of self-belief wasn't over, but it was a step in the right direction. Eli didn't need anyone's approval or validation. He had his own, and that was enough. The following weeks at school felt different for Eli. There was a quiet shift in the air, almost unnoticeable at first, but it was there. His classmates, those who had once doubted him, no longer seemed distant or judgmental. There was a new kind of respect when they looked at him, a recognition of the strength he had shown. Some had even started asking more questions about space and science. And though Eli didn't know it at first, they were asking him because they now saw him as someone who understood, someone who had a connection to something extraordinary. Eli noticed this change most on the playground. The boys who had once laughed when he mentioned NASA now listened intently when he talked about space. A group of girls who had been more focused on their dance routines and fashion now looked at him with curiosity, and some of them even asked if he could bring his dad's NASA badge to school one day. He didn't have to brag or prove anything. All he had to do was show up and speak with the same quiet confidence that his father had shown him. Eli realized that this was the power of belief, not just believing in yourself, but giving others the space to believe in you too. Mila, ever the loyal friend, continued to support him through every conversation. She would walk with him to class and chat about anything and everything, except the NASA stuff. They didn't need to discuss that anymore. It had become a part of who Eli was, and no one needed to ask for the details anymore. They simply understood. "Do you think Dr. Brooks would come again?" Mila asked one day as they sat at lunch. She had a mischievous grin on her face, as though she were planning something. Eli shook his head, smiling. "I don't think he has time. He's too busy talking to rovers or something," he said, his eyes sparkling. Mila laughed. "I bet he'd come back if we asked nicely. You know, he might even have more cool stories about Mars." Eli paused. "Maybe," he said thoughtfully. "But you know what? I think we've got enough of our own cool stories now." It wasn't just about meeting astronauts or having a dad who worked at NASA anymore. It was about the way Eli had stood his ground when everyone else had doubted him. It was about showing up, even when the world made you feel small, and proving that sometimes the most incredible things are not the ones that are loud and flashy, but the ones that are quietly true. Eli had a subtle sense of pride in the weeks that followed, not because of the accolades or the recognition, but because of the quiet victories that came in the form of little moments. The looks of respect from his classmates, the thoughtful questions about space and science, the note from Mr. Riley. Mr. Riley, too, had changed in ways that Eli could see but couldn't fully understand. He had become more attentive in class, more thoughtful in his interactions with the students. Eli had noticed that he wasn't as quick to dismiss ideas or laugh off the dreams of his students. There was a softness in his demeanor now that hadn't been there before. One day after class, Mr. Riley pulled Eli aside. It wasn't anything formal, just a moment of conversation in the hallway. Eli, Mr. Riley started, his voice quieter than usual. I just wanted to thank you. Eli raised an eyebrow. For what? He asked. Mr. Riley sighed, looking down for a moment. For teaching me something I didn't know I needed to learn. About believing in your dreams, no matter how big they seem. About not laughing at someone's truth, even if it doesn't fit in the box you expect. Eli felt a wave of emotion, but he kept his face neutral. I didn't do anything special, he said. Mr. Riley smiled a little. It's not about what you did. It's about what you showed. You showed me how important it is to listen, truly listen, and to respect the dreams and beliefs of others. Eli nodded slowly. Well, you were right about one thing. Mr. Riley looked confused. What's that? You weren't the only one who learned something that day, Eli said with a smile, then walked away, leaving Mr. Riley standing there, feeling a little stunned, but also grateful. Months passed, and life continued to unfold for Eli. The school year was drawing to a close, but he had already learned more in the past few months than most people learn in years. It wasn't about space exploration or NASA, although those things were fascinating. It wasn't even about proving anyone wrong. It was about learning the value of believing in yourself, even when others didn't, and learning how to stand tall, even when the world made you feel small. Eli's dad, Dr. Brooks, had been busy with his work, but he always made time for his son. They continued to bond over the little things, the quiet moments in the garage, the shared laughter over space Wi-Fi jokes, and the calm advice that Eli had come to cherish more than anything else. Don't let someone else's doubt erase your truth, Dr. Brooks had said. You know who you are, and that's what matters. And Eli had held on to those words. He had learned through his own experience that no one could define his path except him. He didn't need anyone's approval or applause. He just needed to keep speaking his truth, keep dreaming big, and keep showing up. It was a lesson that would carry him through his entire life, and one that he would pass on to others when the time came. As Eli walked out of the school building on the last day of the year, he knew that his journey had just begun. The road ahead was filled with unknowns, but he wasn't afraid anymore, because he understood now his dreams were valid, his voice was powerful, and his truth didn't need anyone's permission to be heard. Years later, Eli would look back at this day and recognize it as one of the most important moments of his life. It wasn't the day his dad had walked in with a NASA badge, and it wasn't the day the teacher apologized. It was the day that Eli had learned to believe in himself, to stand firm in his truth, and to never let anyone shrink his dreams. In the years that followed, Eli would go on to do incredible things, things that many people would say were impossible or unrealistic. But in his heart, he knew that the real power lay not in achieving those dreams, but in the belief that made them possible in the first place. And as he walked through life, he would always remember that lesson. The truth doesn't need permission. It just needs someone brave enough to say it out loud. The story of Eli and his journey through doubt, determination, and triumph is a powerful reminder of the importance of standing firm in our truth, even when the world around us may try to make us shrink. It highlights the significance of having the courage to speak up, to chase our dreams, and to believe in ourselves when others might doubt or dismiss us. More importantly, it is a testament to the transformative power of support, both from those who believe in us when we don't believe in ourselves, and from those who are willing to challenge their own assumptions and biases. Throughout Eli's experience, we see a young boy who faced ridicule and disbelief when he shared something as meaningful as his father's work at NASA. It was not just the laughter of his classmates, nor the dismissive chuckles from his teacher that stung the most, but the realization that someone in a position of authority, someone who was meant to inspire and uplift, had dismissed his truth. It wasn't just a slight against Eli's words, it was an assault on his sense of worth, his pride, and his belief in the possibilities that lay ahead. And in that moment, when the teacher laughed, Eli could have folded in on himself, giving up on his dreams, doubting the very thing that made him unique. But then something incredible happened. Eli's father walked into that room with a quiet confidence that spoke volumes, Doctor. Brooks didn't need to make a grand entrance. He didn't need to wave his NASA badge around for validation. He simply stood there, spoke about the work he did, and reminded everyone that sometimes the world is smaller than we think. What was considered impossible or unrealistic for some was entirely plausible for others. His calm presence shattered the misconceptions, not with anger, but with a quiet truth that could not be ignored. Dr. Brooks didn't just show up for Eli, he showed up for every student in that room who had ever been made to feel smaller than they truly were. This moment is more than just an inspiring father-son interaction. It's a metaphor for all of us. How often do we allow others' limited perceptions of us to dictate our path? How many of us shrink back when we're told our dreams are unrealistic, or when we are laughed at for believing in something bigger than ourselves? It's easy to succumb to the pressure to fit into a box, to play it safe, to conform to others' expectations. But what Eli and his father teach us is that it is in those very moments of doubt that we must stand taller, not because we are trying to prove anyone wrong, but because we owe it to ourselves to honor our own potential. The real beauty of this story lies in Eli's growth. Despite the initial sting of rejection, he chose to keep moving forward. He chose to hold his head up high, to remain true to his father's words, and to trust that his own truth was enough. In the face of uncertainty, he didn't need validation from anyone else. He had already been given the tools to succeed, the ability to speak his truth, the confidence to back it up, and the belief in himself that he would need to face the inevitable obstacles of life. The lesson here is simple, yet profound. The truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to be said. Eli's journey shows us that when we speak our truth with conviction, others will see the strength in it, whether they express it immediately or not. His classmates, who had once laughed, began to admire his quiet strength. His teacher, who had initially dismissed him, saw his mistake and grew from it. The story teaches us that people may doubt us, but they can only do so for as long as we allow them to. When we stop shrinking and start speaking up, we open doors not only for ourselves but for others too. This story also brings forth the idea of self-belief and the importance of creating a supportive community around us. Eli's friend Mila showed us what it means to stand by someone in their toughest moments. She didn't need to question whether Eli's truth was valid. She simply supported him. In a world where so many of us are quick to doubt or criticize, it's those small acts of kindness and belief that can have the most profound impact on someone's life. If there's one message that resonates from this story, it is this: never let someone else's limited view of you define your path. Your dreams, no matter how big, are valid. Your truth, no matter how much others might try to diminish it, is powerful. And your voice, when spoken with conviction, has the ability to change the world. Not just for you, but for others who need to hear it too. For all of us who have ever been doubted or made to feel small, remember that we do not need permission to dream big. As Eli's father wisely said, you know who you are. That's what matters. If you're reading this and something within you stirs, a feeling of understanding, a sense of connection, then you are already on the right path. Keep speaking your truth, keep showing up, and never let anyone convince you that your dreams are unrealistic. Because in the end, they are not your limitations to carry. If this story has inspired you in any way, we invite you to join us on this journey of growth, reflection, and empowerment. Subscribe to the channel and be a part of a community that celebrates self-belief, personal growth, and the power of dreaming big. Your support allows us to continue creating content that inspires, uplifts, and challenges the limits of what we can achieve. Together, we can keep pushing forward, proving that no dream is too big and no voice is too small. Thank you for being here. Keep dreaming, keep believing, and as always, keep speaking your truth.